Hello, everyone. Alberto here from Stark, and today I am joined by Caitlyn. Caitlyn, how do I say your last name, actually?
Mayers.
Mayers. I'm joined today by Caitlyn Mayers, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. Caitlyn is a really big part of our community. She is continuously talking to every one of our members, be it in our Slack groups, even on Twitter, etc. So I'm really excited to have her here today because we had a conversation specifically about hiring practices that I was particularly, interested in learning more about. So, Caitlyn, thank you so much for joining me today. Feel free to intro yourself. Who are you and what are you up to?
Sure thing. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Caitlyn Mayers. I am a designer by training and trade, and currently my role is as an associate creative director at a consulting company, CapTech, and I am physically located in Richmond, Virginia. My day to day job responsibilities are anything and everything from reviewing designs to delivering designs to most recently, I've been doing a lot of accessibility work. And I've been interested in accessibility for the better part of the last 5 years now. It's something that I kind of stumbled into, and I feel very fortunate to have stumbled into it. And as part of my stumbling into it, I discovered Stark in its early days. And it's been amazing to be a part of the community in this last year to have such a wonderful resource of people who have all kinds of knowledge and expertise and experience in accessibility, design, and all the fields in between that may not be directly related to those. So it's been really, really exciting to just have a group of people that you can chat with, especially in the environment we're in now where the social interactions are a little bit different than what they used to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Big shout out to the community itself. I mean, I do feel I just started with Stark a couple of months ago, and really, my title is community advocate. My job is kind of dreamy because it's having conversations with you, having conversations with the rest of the community. And one of the things that I told Kat when I first joined, or one of my hesitations to say yes immediately, was the fact that I don't consider myself an expert. Like many people, I sort of stumbled into accessibility. Claudio, who I've interviewed before, also is a very big accessibility advocate down in South Florida, where I'm located. And just by going to events and asking questions and sort of like poking around, I've been able to find out more. And personally, my job does include managing a group of people. So I was able to introduce accessibility into like design systems and stuff like that. But one of my biggest hesitations is I don't consider myself an expert. But what I came to find that is so special about this community, and again, shout out to the Start community, is that how welcoming it is. So even if you've never heard of any terms of accessibility, there's plenty of people such as yourself, Caitlyn, just waiting for people with open arms and willing to walk them through, sort of explain and guide them through how to learn more about this field and how to apply it to day-to-day work, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I always try to keep in mind that I don't know everything there is to know about accessibility, and I will never know everything there is to know about accessibility. And that's the beauty of the work that we do. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that we all start somewhere. And I firmly believe that the path to inclusion and accessibility and really truly delivering the best possible work we can and being the best possible people to each other requires us to just meet people where they are and help get them started on their journey, because each one of us is going to have a unique path. And that's what makes accessibility so exciting. So I think it's just really, really amazing to be a part of such a welcoming community. I think it's so true. The people who are into accessibility are really interested in the collective good. And so I think that that particular interest and that motivation, I think, is what helps foster such a unique community environment.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It it brings my daughter would say happy tears to me. Just hearing it from the other side is so fantastic, and I get to the fact that I get to be a part of it is so amazing. You mentioned getting into accessibility, and I think that's the perfect segue into what my first question to you would be. What got you into accessibility? Why accessibility? Why have you been focusing the last 5 years, as you mentioned, on accessibility?
I love this question because it's a really personal story for me, and it's something that I try to remember every day why I got into this space and why I'm so passionate about it. So, just under 5 years ago was when I started working at CapTech Consulting, and it was my first week on the job was either the week or the second week after I lost my grandma, and she was the my first grandparent that I was fortunate enough in my life that I had all of my grandparents for a very, very long time. And I was talking to one of my coworkers just in a generic, like, hey, how's it going? Get to know you, icebreaker kind of conversation. And I'm not going to lie, being in the throes of grief is a weird headspace to be in when you start a new job, but it was what it was.
Yeah,
So I, was just kind of talking to them about, yeah, so life's a little weird right now. And one of the things that I was sharing with my coworker was that my grandma had multiple sclerosis, and there are several kinds of multiple sclerosis, but the kind that she had was the kind that kind of slowly took over her body over time, and she lost fine motor control. She lost the ability to move independently.
yeah,
And in sharing this detail, my coworker kind of sensed something. His name is Chris LaCroix. He works at CarMax as a product designer now, but he and I are still good buds. And he said, "Have you heard anything about web accessibility?" And I had, but the truth is that I had only heard some former developer colleagues of mine kind of grumbling about having to make something 508 compliant. So I just kind of briefly mentioned that to him, and he said, "I think you should really take a look at this space and see if it's interesting to you." So I took a look. He recommended that I go to the WebAIM training out at Utah State University in Logan, Utah. And I was there just a few months later, and that changed my life. I mean, that conversation and then getting to do that training set the course of focus, of interest, and of passion that I have really been able to explore in the last 5 years. And I plan to continue on in all of the work I do for as long as I'm fortunate enough to be a designer of digital experiences.
yeah. First of all, I'm so sorry about your loss, but I'm glad that at the very least you found a little bit of your calling in experiencing some of that, and shout out to your buddy for getting you interested as well. I do think that there's something so exciting. One thing that I describe often about accessibility is the work of a digital designer is to always be chasing technology and being inventive about how to use that technology to better serve people. uh, Accessibility is very special because it allows you to think about the people that are often forgotten when people and it's not necessarily on purpose. One of the things that I mentioned in the past is when I started learning about accessibility, I was so surprised to find out this huge field with all of these people and expertise, and I'm like, how is it possible that I felt a little bit cheated by my own education? How is it possible that I go throughout my career and I'm already a senior lead, or I learned about accessibility after I had already started managing teams. So even
Yeah.
my work as a designer, my work as a lead designer, as a supervisor, as a manager, completely oblivious that I should have been thinking and directing my teams to think about accessibility. Uh, to me, that is just it's heartbreaking to a certain extent. Um, But that being said, I mean, not everything has to be. I don't like to focus on the negative aspect of it. To me, when I started finding out about accessibility, there was no question that this needs to be a focus, and something that we discuss openly with teams, and we start writing documentation so that everybody can be on the same page. But also, it's such a great and unique challenge. You know, if you're coming from it and you haven't gotten into accessibility, the reason why you are a UX designer, chances are, is because you enjoy solving problems for people. You know, that's the whole meaning uh, behind what we do. And here's this really large group of people that need solutions that are often forgotten when people are designing their flashy interfaces and doing all kinds of motion work and whatnot. And I feel like it's such a great challenge and something that we'll never finish learning, because there's new devices that we have to support that are continuously coming out, new technologies, new ways of interacting with technology. So there's a lot of people working in VR or augmented experiences, etc., which, you know, also need some type of accessibility. Um, and if you do enjoy being challenged and solving problems, then accessibility is such a great field. Uh, but I digress. um, One of the things that you mentioned in our Slack group, and what really prompted this conversation, just because it's close to my heart as well, as a manager, I'm a hiring manager, meaning that for the past like 10 years, I've been building, managing, and sort of directing teams. And I know that you're in a similar position. And you mentioned something about your hiring process and how accessibility fits into that. So, would you mind going into that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I have been really getting into the hiring process in the last several years as well. And there are so many things that I think that are important to consider just overall when you're building teams and making sure that the teams reflect the people that you serve. I always like to make sure that we are gauging potential candidates' level of familiarity with accessibility. And I think to your earlier point, the reason why accessibility isn't as commonplace as it should be or isn't as built into the work that we do, I think is due directly to issues with the education pipeline. Like yourself, it wasn't until I was well into designing interfaces that I even learned about accessibility being a thing. And because of that education gap, I don't expect people to come in the door being able to recite success criteria from memory, right? But I do want to gauge their level of familiarity with it because I think that the industry has shifted enough, especially in the last year, that most people who have a high level of intellectual curiosity and keep up with the conversations on design Twitter, for example, or thought leadership in the UX blogs, even like sidebar.io has a lot of accessibility focused posts. So anybody who I think is keeping the pulse of the industry should have some awareness of accessibility. You don't have to be an expert practitioner by any sense of the imagination, but I want to know that design candidates are aware of it and understand what it means. I also want to make sure that our teams are asking these questions because I'm not the only person who's doing technical interviews or doing our behavioral interviews, but we are standardizing a set of criteria and questions that we are making sure that we assess candidates against. And again, it's not a do they check a box on accessibility or not. It's more so a asking questions framework around do they know about it, and if they say they know about it, how much do they really know about it, because sometimes people will bluff you,
Right.
right? So
Yeah.
asking some questions just to gauge their general awareness is what I'm interested in. And if they don't have much of an awareness, that's fine. What I think is most important is a real drive for knowledge, for learning, and a hunger for building things that people can use. And if we as a group, and if we individually as people who hire can suss that out, I think we're well on our way to building teams that can quickly shift the paradigm and begin to deliver accessible experiences as a part of the standard for design work that we create.
Yeah, and what I love about that, I mean, just being super familiar with hiring processes and interviewing and bringing people. Well, back when we could bring people into the office to do sort of roundtable conversations and really gauge how somebody would fit and how their expertise would fit into the team. Um, Chances are, if you interview for one role and you end up interviewing 12 people, that role will go to one person. However, if the accessibility conversation happened during those conversations, guess what? You already affected 12 people. They're if they really wanted to work here, it means that they either validated that they know about accessibility, or now they're curious and they're doing their own research and what is accessibility. I had never heard about that. And I think that's how we can. We're in the moment where we need to spread the word. Things have happened in our industry that have truly catapulted the type of efforts that we need to put in place. I've experienced it from the inside in big enterprises. When um, the court ruled against Domino's for not having an accessible website, I think that sent waves. Pun intended. I'm in the cruising industry, so that sent waves through the design industry and enterprise as a whole, where people, at least in the US, they're really looking into um, what do we need to do. First and foremost, the lowest bar is to be compliant and not be exposed to litigation. Which to me, as a designer, of course, I'm a dreamer. I like to shoot a little bit higher than that. It's like compliance is not enough. It's like, why would we just drag the bar, only just enough? But the reality of business is that a lot of people will look for that as a success criteria. But as a designer and working with engineering teams, working with product teams, to me, my biggest joy is being able to have those very round table conversations where we're like, okay, so what falls on my plate, what falls in your plate, how are we going to do this? And you get these very interesting interactions that in my case would be presenting something to the VP, or having those type of conversations, and somebody will ask, hey, did you check the contrast on that, or is that font big enough? Very small things. Or we'll get somebody, we're working on design systems and working on creating components for React, and we'll get questions like, hey, how do you see the tab order going for this, or what does a focus state look like? That just brings joy to my heart. The fact that everybody is in on the conversation, because at the end of the day, this is not, and you mentioned this is not a one person role. It's not like we can bring just one person into the team and all of a sudden, hey, accessibility is complete. That's not how it works. It really requires of a lot of people kind of like jumping in and rowing in the same direction. I'm catching myself with all these ship puns and boat puns. uh, I need something different. um
I I
yeah.
think you touch on so many good points there. One of the things I really try to emphasize when I'm doing internal trainings on accessibility, I've been doing them twice a year approximately for the last couple of years, and it's mostly just building awareness and getting people interested in this space. But one of the things that I try to really reinforce is the fact that it is a shared responsibility. It ultimately, with the web and any built experience, right? It comes down to the code that's shipped as to whether or not the experience is accessible. But every single decision made to get to the point where that code has been shipped has an accessibility consequence. So I
Yeah.
believe firmly that we have to equip our teams with the right knowledge, with the right processes, with the appropriate roles, knowledge, and processes for their specific role because everyone has a part to play. And I think the other thing that you said that really also resonates with me very strongly is the fact that, if you interview 12 people and you select one, the other 11 will have been exposed to that conversation about accessibility. I very much view my responsibility as someone who knows about and advocates for accessibility. That part of that responsibility is to make sure that everyone that I come in contact with and work with who is able to learn about accessibility from me takes that knowledge with them onto whatever project they go to next, to whatever job that they work on next. I don't believe that the teams we're on now are going to be the teams we're on forever. That's just not the truth.
Yeah.
So I view part of my role as an accessibility leader in whatever capacity I'm in is to make sure that I'm equipping people for their next role and their next job so that they're able to then continue to spread the word and evangelize for accessibility. And one of the moments where it really dawned on me that that was working was when I randomly walked into a meeting for a completely different project that I was not on. It was a different design team of people that I hadn't really worked with much. They were all fairly new to our team. And I
Yeah.
walked into the room and I sat down and I was supposed to review something with them, and the conversation about accessibility just started. We were in the middle of walking through some feedback, and someone started bringing up accessibility. And then I just saw it rippling through everyone in the room. And I just went, my God, we're here. Like,
Yeah.
it's starting to be baked into the work we do. And I almost cried. It was amazing. And so I think that it's really, really exciting to think about how we can really expand the community of practitioners and really just, even if it's small steps now, work toward building a more accessible and equitable digital space for people.
Absolutely. I mean, and we talk about Kat and I talk about this all the time. If it was part of my checklist, even, if it's part of what I believe needs to be done to put great products out there, as a designer, I'm going to feel very responsible for making sure that that happens. And the same thing happens with engineers and product people. I've seen it firsthand. And the ability for people to not only find out, what's kind of like behind that door, but really feel that this type of accountability and be open to having those conversations, I think is crucial. One thing that happened last year, which I really, really liked. And I should do a little bit of digging to see if we have something similar here, was a law that was passed for every public serving institution in the UK. It is required that they meet accessibility compliance. That their website is inclusive of everyone. Their website, I should say, it extends to all interactive experiences. So they had a different timeline. If it's a website, they had a timeline. I believe by summer 2021, all interactive experiences, including native applications and stuff like that. But part of the requirement is that if you're not 100% there, that you have to have a page on your site disclosing what you have done, so that you're accountable for that, what you're working on, and by when you will be ready. And I believe that type of transparency is going to get us to the point where everybody feels comfortable talking about this. One thing that I've noticed is that people talking about it, often feel like they're exposing themselves to have fingers pointed at them, like, hey, you're not doing enough. We have to get over that. And as educators also on our side, Caitlin, I believe that is part of our responsibility to also be aware that not everybody comes from the same background. Not everybody has had the same experiences. They're not going to have the same level of understanding. We're all different. Um, and I think we have to bake that into how we approach and talk about accessibility. We can't, and I know we don't do this, but I'm just saying as a whole, accessibility shouldn't be about finger pointing and being very corrosive as to, well, your company is not doing this, your company not. It's fair to hold people accountable, but especially for designers, engineers, or developers and product folk that maybe haven't been exposed to this, or have been exposed to this through the lens of a company that is trying to do just enough, that they're trying to get 60% compliant or something like that. I think we have to develop a welcoming language, so that, and maybe that's not fair. I know people that disagree with me for sure on this, because they're like, no, not welcoming language, it's BS. You have to do what you have to do, and I do agree with that. But I also don't want to scare people away from even approaching accessibility as a topic, because it's something that is needed everywhere. It's not enough if 2 out of 10 people are doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly feel that tension in the conversations that I have on a daily basis about accessibility because, at some level, if we're talking about practical accessibility, when you're looking at something and you're saying this is inaccessible, what you're telling the people that designed it and developed it is that they failed at their job. That's not an easy message to hear. And so I think thinking about it from that lens, and one of the things that I am particularly cognizant of and thinking through is in the way that I give feedback and talk about accessibility, how am I creating an environment in which the people on the other side of this feedback can and will receive it well, and that it's a really positive conversation? At the same time, I certainly do see and feel myself the other side of, ugh, like, come on, we've known about this for decades. Like,
Yeah.
why aren't we still doing this? And so I think it kind of depends on the day. You catch me if I'm in a good mood or if I'm in a bad mood, how I
Yeah.
frame the conversation. But, I think it is this push and pull between it being the right thing to do, but knowing that not everybody's in the same place. And that's okay. We'll get there. I really do believe that we'll get there. I mean, just yesterday, whitehouse.gov 2.1 AA conformant. Like, I mean, you could criticize that they're not AAA, but you know what? It's a new dawn, it's a new day.
Dark
I think
mode.
that the
That's,
tide,
I saw a lot of
right?
people
Like,
like, yeah.
I think that the tide on the conversation around accessibility is shifting very, very quickly. And what I'm excited about is having that, being here at this point on the conversation of accessibility and really being a part of the movement, for lack of a better term, in making sure that we are equipping our teams with everything that they need to be successful. And, one of the things that I try to use when I'm framing the conversation with nice Caitlin is, we don't create things so that people can't consume them.
Yeah.
We're not making content so people can't use it. And when we design exclusively, when we design for just our own contexts of how we use the internet, we're fundamentally not living up to the promise of the internet and the technology that we are designing for. And hopefully that resonates with some people. It certainly resonates with me as I've been thinking through, the kind of the ethical and moral implications of what it means to be a technologist in this year of our Lord 2021. Um,
Yeah. That's, I mean, such a great choice of words. I don't even have anything to add to that, other than, I guess, what would you say for other leaders, technology leaders and design leaders that are approaching or thinking about accessibility? What would you say to them as your advice on how to think about it, how to approach it, how to start applying it?
There are a few things that come to mind. The first thing is something that I feel like I struggle with all the time, especially since I read Kat Holmes' wonderful book Mismatch. That book changed my life.
Oh,
I feel like I've talked about so many life-changing
I
moments
gotta write it
reading that
down.
book. It's super, super good. Um, in that book, she talks about designing with, not for. And one
Hmm.
of the things that I'm constantly thinking about is composing teams of people across a spectrum of ability so that it's not just white, able bodied dudes building things for people. And so when I think about accessibility from a management and a leadership perspective, the thing that I feel like is next for how my own leadership journey is figuring out how to compose teams where I can also learn from the people that I'm designing with, who are people who use assistive technology, etc. So that's one thing. But for other things I think that are a little bit more on topic to the question, uh, I always try to make sure that accessibility is top of mind in the conversations we're having. I think elevating it to the same level as any of the other things we talk about when we're giving feedback, when we're talking about hiring people, when we're talking about building systems, designing processes or tools, make sure that accessibility is elevated to the same level of conversation as all the other things we think about. Because I think that goes a really long way towards the inclusion piece of what we're talking about.
It really does. Yeah.
I also think that it's important as someone who's in leadership to make sure that you always remind yourself that you're never going to get it right and you're never going to be perfect. Um, I think in this space, it's really easy for me to apply pressure just on myself and kick myself when I make a poor decision or one that is not as accessible as it could have been. You're always going to be making those decisions. So I think remember to give yourself some grace, but also to give your teams some grace as well, because we're all learning together. This is a journey, this is a continuum, this isn't something that's going to stop. So I think giving yourself room to fail and understanding how you can improve and learn from that failure is really important. And then I think one of the other things from a leadership perspective is thinking about ways that you can bake it into the work that you do. And this is one of is accessibility specifically. I am a firm believer that the way that we build the internet we want is working ourselves out of a job when it comes to accessibility. So that accessibility is no longer its own thing. Accessibility is true to design. That the definition of being a designer includes accessibility just as part of the expected outcome.
Yes. Yes.
So anything we can do to start building in intrinsic accessibility and start getting out of this ad hoc accessibility is what I am continually thinking about. And it doesn't have to be huge, huge things that you do. Start really small. Start with something like making sure your design team has Stark installed and they learn how to check their contrast and what checking color contrast means. You can start with really, really small decisions that, in my experience, snowball over time to the point where you're in a meeting like I was and everyone in the room is talking about it and you weren't the one to initiate the conversation. So pick something really, really small that you know that you can succeed at rolling out to your team and start with that. Give yourself small wins, give your team small wins, and you can build on that foundation and accelerate your accessibility maturity into the future.
Amazing. Caitlin, that is such great advice. I wanna definitely thank you so much for making time to speak to me today. This was super insightful, not only because I was just curious based on what you've shared already with the community. I wanted to sort of pick your brain and go a little bit deeper and even compare notes with some of the things that I've been doing and some of the things that I've been struggling with as a leader and as a manager. So truly, I mean, I can't thank you enough for making time to have this conversation. Any closing remarks, or where can people find you online?
Yeah, wow. Well, if people want to find me on the internet, that's their personal choice. I don't necessarily recommend it. My alter ego is Hatelyn. That's there's nice Caitlyn and then there's Hatelyn.
I love
Um,
that.
it's amazing. Somebody gave me that nickname at my last job a few years ago, and I was like, "This is amazing. This is perfect. This is absolutely perfect." But before that. So it's honestly been such a pleasure I love talking shop with people, especially when it comes to accessibility. There's always something you can learn from somebody else. So, I think these conversations are super important and super valuable. So thank you for giving me the space to have the conversation. I think, the Stark community is just such a lovely place. I posted this in the Slack group last year, I think around Thanksgiving, but truly, I'm super thankful for everything that community gives and everything that community is, because it truly is a special place. If people want to find me on the internet for my spicy takes, sometimes about accessibility, sometimes about politics, sometimes about design, my Twitter handle is my full name. It's Caitlyn Mayers. Um, and I'm also in the Stark group, so you can come
Yeah,
on and find me there. But yeah,
join our Slack channel for sure. I'll drop
right.
the link below.
I know. I think I don't have a YouTube channel because I'm not cool. But I think you're
You're
supposed
on
to say
YouTube
like
now
and
as of
subscribe.
this.
Smash that subscribe button.
Please. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, you too.